We're here with Richard Arum and Yusupa Raksa. Richard Arum is Professor of Sociology and Education at New York University and a Senior Fellow at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Yusupa Raksa is Associate Professor of Sociology and Education at the University of Virginia. Many people in our audience will know them as the authors of Academically Adrift, Limited Learning on College Campuses. And their new book, coming out this fall, is Aspiring Adults Adrift, Tentative Transitions of College Graduates. Richard and Yusupa, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So scores of books are written about higher education each year. Few of them have the kind of public and cultural impact that Academically Adrift had 3 years ago. Why do you think that was?
We were surprised, pleasantly surprised initially. Richard and I had a meeting scheduled for early February, and we figured by the time that meeting came around, we could talk about other events and other projects we were working on. So the initial response and how much interest it drew, we were both flattered and surprised. It was the zeitgeist. There were lots of conversations. It was the right time for it to be published and to raise the questions that many were asking. And what was different, right, is we had an objective measure of critical thinking, conflict reasoning, and writing. So lots of people had fears about what college may or may not be producing, but we actually had some data to substantiate some of those concerns.
You talk about the zeitgeist that it connected to. Part of the zeitgeist that emerged then and since then is this question of whether or not college is worth it. And many people who were skeptical and raised questions about college used your book to bolster their argument.
Yeah, but
what was your reaction?
That was dead wrong from the start, and we often got called by journalists that wanted us to go on the record saying that, but it was exactly the opposite of what we believed and knew to be true. College, it's absolutely clear that going to college is a valuable investment, even with the debts that our students are now taking on for the students that attend them. And that's even more so the case for working class students than students that come from privileged backgrounds. So that question, is college worth it, is just the wrong question to be asked. There is a question that Joseph and I are very much focused on, and that is, are students getting the value for their investment that they could? That is, are colleges doing everything they could to provide for and support students in their academic careers and to facilitate their transitions to adulthood? And that's the right question. What can colleges do better? How can colleges do better to meet the needs of the students that are attending them?
Right. Your new book, Aspiring Adults Adrift, follows a subset of students that you followed in Academically Adrift. And this is something you've reported previously in a study that came out about 2 years ago that some in our audience may be familiar with. And you had found, among other things, that those who were adrift in college continued to be adrift after college. If they were less engaged and scored not as well on the Collegiate Learning Assessment, which is a test of critical thinking skills, they tended not to do so well on measures of civic engagement, debt levels, employment levels. Why was that surprising to you?
Well, I think some of the outcomes were not surprising.
Right.
What was surprising perhaps was the magnitude of those outcomes. The difficult labor market transitions you might expect. These students entered the job market at one of the most difficult times in history. But at the same time, to see how difficult those transitions were, how many students were in unskilled jobs that they probably could have never imagined being in college, how few of them were civically engaged, right? We knew that some of them would not be, but that so many of them were not reading the papers, were not talking about politics and public affairs. And it was a pleasant surprise, and we were quite glad to find that the CLA, as rough of an indicator as it is of general collegiate skills, tracked pretty well with those outcomes. So it suggests that there is actually something we need to seriously think about. It's not just about getting the degree. It is actually about what students do in college and what kind of skills they leave college with.
Now, of course, the students you followed, as we all know, graduated into a terrible economy. And at the same time, they also brought with them into college a set of dispositions and experiences and academic proclivities, and there are larger societal and structural issues at play. One question that some people may have is, to what extent is it fair to lay the blame on higher education, and to what extent are these forces shaped well before they walk in the door?
Yeah, well, you as sociologists, we certainly believe that what happens at college is embedded into a reflection of broader sets of economic, social, cultural forces at play. That's to be sure. But the other thing that is equally true is that college experiences are an interaction between the students and the institutions. And so, yes, students come in the doors with particular attitudes and dispositions and academic preparation, but then there's an interaction that occurs between them and the adult educators in the institution. And so that's the piece that educators have a responsibility to shape and influence student outcomes. And that's the piece that Josip and I are most concerned that higher education really needs to step up and do a better job of meeting student needs in terms of academic quality, as well as, again, more generally in supporting transitions to adulthood.
What are some ways that they might do that?
Well, one of the ways is certainly to think about academic rigor. Right, so we have argued in Academically Adrift and continue that academic rigor is crucial. What students learn in college and what skills they leave college with is really important for what happens afterward. So colleges, as opposed to abdicating responsibility and letting students define the college experience as a social experience, as a fun time to be in college, they have a responsibility to bring the academics and the faculty back to the center and to make the case that actually college is first and foremost about academics. They have responsibility for thinking and trying to provide students ways of planful and thoughtful development of paths going forward. So it's not just enough to give students optimism, to think that life is going to be great and that college degree is a ticket to the world, but to actually provide students with attitudes, skills, dispositions, ties to employers, and attitudes about civic engagement that they can take with them and then be successful in a life after college.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in today, Richard Aram and Josip Araksa.